Hi, everyone, and welcome. On today's program, we are joined by Einar Tangen, senior fellow at the Taihe Institute, and also the founder and chairman of Asia Narratives. So, welcome. It's great to have you on the program.
It's always a pleasure to be with a fellow Norwegian.
Thank you. So, well, on this, you're a half Norwegian, and half Korean, but you're born in Washington, and you now reside in Beijing, I think, for the past 20 years or so, or
Correct.
yeah.
Guilty as charged. Third of my life.
So, well, it gives you a very interesting perspective, though, on especially the economic tensions and conflicts now between the United States and China, as you can call both places home now. Now, we see that often the discussions about the rise of China, we often end up and get trapped in cliches such as the common statement that the US innovates, China replicates. My concern is that we often end up deluding ourselves to our own peril by refusing to see the world as it actually is. So, I guess, how would you explain the China's economic development now, which has gone through, of course, many very different stages, as China of 2025 is not China of 2010. But how can we best understand the economic development of China and where it's heading and its challenges as well?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to start visiting China in around the time that the WTO was founded, around 2000. So basically, I've witnessed this whole period, and China was developing before, but as soon as China joined the WTO, they expanded on steroids. All of a sudden, you started to see just kind of this breakneck speed of double-digit growth year by year. It wasn't always easy, though. I mean, the economic growth was very fast. The social growth, not so much. I mean, when you would go to cities, you see migrant workers living in what you thought was terrible conditions until you went to their hometowns and saw how they lived normally and how hard they worked. So if you want to understand how China got where it was, a country that had no real monetary reserves, they don't have resources. In fact, out of approximately 200 countries in the world, China's at number 100 in terms of resources per person. So they had nothing to sell, really. So how do they get from that point? They don't have a mature economic system. They don't have banks. They have insurance companies. Practice of law is practically non-existent. I know that because I was a lawyer and I was talking to lawyers here. And I had been an investment banker, so I was also talking to what asked for financial people here. So they didn't have a modern economy. So how did they do that? Well, a lot of it was just pure planning. It's amazing what you can do if you have a plan. And as you know, the cliche goes, um, a failure to plan is planning to fail. So China developed these 5-year plans and they say, okay, we're going to get this done. Now, how do they finance it? A lot of the early stuff was done on this build, own, turnover basis. So they'd say, well, we need a highway from here to there. But it was a planned highway. It wasn't a highway that was connecting somebody's brother-in-law's property in the middle of nowhere, like we often get in the United States. I was a politician there, so I knew the inner workings. Used to run elections, um, and they would say, okay, we're going to be on the same side of the table. You're going to get all your money back plus your profit, and then you turn it over to us. And I know quite a few people who got very, very wealthy, including a lot of people in Hong Kong who were doing this. They could speak partially the language and things like this, and they were able to do it. So China's done it hard work, incredibly hard work. I see people working grueling 12, 14-hour days, and I feel sorry for them. But, when you talk to them, they'd say, hey, I get paid. All right. These are people who I met who said, look, I used to have meat once a year, literally. And now I have meat 2, 3 times a week. For them, it was just incredible that they could get these things after being deprived for so long. So it's always about perspective. They worked hard, they made money, they took their money back, they started businesses or continued farming, but they could actually go out and buy a tractor, whereas before they couldn't do it. They had to literally till the soil with their own hands and a few simple tools. So that's how China developed so quickly. But they also paid attention to education. The United States right now, we have 60% of our population that only reads to a sixth grade level or less. In China, if you're talking about people under 45, you're at 99% literacy and a fairly high level. So, I mean, it's really about what is your government doing to help your society move forward. In 1971, the United States had 61% of its people classified as middle class. Today, based on, they did a study in 2024 of median income, 2023, and they discovered that only 40% of America was indeed middle class. Now, there were some upper middle class, but it's frightening how much change there has been in opposite direction. So this, in a long-winded way, gets back to your question: what is happening with the U.S. and China? U.S. feels that they've lost a step. China feels that they, have worked hard for what they have. Donald Trump is a populist who's appealing to those people who feel disappointed, and rightly so. I mean, party after party in the United States has taken office, taken power, but nothing's changed. The deficit keeps growing. People aren't being better educated. There aren't better opportunities. Everything seems to be some sort of phony financialization game where rich guys make bets on things, and if it works out, they get huge bonuses. Meanwhile, other people are being forced to, right today, literally, they're buying groceries on a buy now, pay later. That means they don't have credit card access for whatever reason. They lost it or they've maxed it out and they're desperate. When you're buying groceries and say, I'll pay you a payday loan, which is going to add up over a year to about 500% interest, it means you're desperate. So China has changed, the US has changed. The friction of that change is what we're seeing here today. Unfortunately, Donald Trump believes that it's back to the future, that reindustrializing America at a time when we're going through a digital revolution. The digital revolution is, in my mind, equivalent to the industrial revolution. There are so many things that are going to change. First time that white collar workers are going to experience layoffs and changes in their job duties. And that is happening as we speak. Well, Donald Trump says, the future is we'll reindustrialize. Well, most industrialization is very low profit. And if you want to make big profits, unfortunately, industrialization isn't the way to go unless you're dealing with new materials, robotics, the things that have the intersection of technology, digitalization, ways that you can increase the amount of output, productivity, these types of things. So in a long-winded way, I was just saying that two countries in different directions, one that plans and one that isn't able to.
This is, I guess, an unfortunate development of the nationalism in the United States. Now, nationalism isn't all bad. It has a good purpose of, unifying the group. But what was always kind of unique with American nationalism was it was always very optimistic. That is, often nationalism tends to go into the recognizing when was our golden era, who took it away, and these are our adversaries. But America, because it always went from strength to strength, they used to have a positive nationalism, that is, assuming that tomorrow will be brighter than today. But now, of course, we see that they've fallen a bit more into the, I guess, the European version, if you will, when we, look, we were the greatest. What happened? The Chinese took it away from us, and it can delve into a very, I guess, an uglier form. But the Chinese development was quite interesting because for a long time it looked as if this, you mentioned the very poor people they had, that this unlimited supply apparently of cheap labor from the countryside, which migrated into the cities, that this was a good way of fueling labor to continue to keep exports high. And, this was used to save money, build up foreign reserves, also move factories across the world to China. But at the same time, as you said, they didn't squander this money. Max Weber's, morality of the capitalist morality of the Protestants, effectively, pointed out you reinvested, and you see that they reinvested this in the people, but also, of course, in technology. So the economic development has shifted a bit, and I think when the U.S. tries to cripple some of China's economy now, it looks as if this was the tactic you could have done in the 90s, but not what you would want to do today. That it's too late, if you will, to cripple them. But yeah, that takes me to my question, which was as you said, if you want to industrialize today, you have to take into account what some refer to as the fourth industrial revolution, which is the digital technologies are taking over a lot of the processes in the physical world, including manufacturing, which is why countries like Vietnam will have some challenges. But what would be did you see then that the American efforts to cripple the Chinese economy, is it gonna boomerang back at them, or is it just gonna increase China's determinants to create further autonomy? Where do you see this economic war going?
Well, it's both of those things. It has boomeranged back. The United States, we said, look, we're not going to allow you access to sensitive technology. So what happened? China's developing their own, and at a very rapid pace. I remember talking to some high-level executives, and they said, well, no, China's 10, 15 years behind. They'll never catch up. And, Glenn, I hate to say this, but, it was racism. I mean, I was in the U.S. I was the highest ranking Asian in my state. And I used to hear all the kind of nonsense that you can imagine. I said, good percentage of your professors are Asian. How come there are only one Asian in the administration of these, 26 universities and colleges, given 10, 15% of them were Asian? And they were considered relatively highly. I mean, they were highly prized. They were well paid. They said, they don't want to be in a position of authority. They never ask for anything. He says, well, did it ever occur to you that from their perspective, it's always about showing your competence, demonstrating it, and being humble and having other people recognize that? Well, they'd look at me and say, well, I don't know, Einar, I don't think so. They're not like you, that type of thing. And, it was kind of backhanded compliments and things like this. So, yes, I mean, the U.S., it is not just Asians. The U.S. has been, look what they've done, how they classify anybody from South America, a neighboring state, Mexico. They're all drug dealers and rapists and things like that. And the man who says that is president of the United States, and there have been no repercussions for him. He's gotten elected twice. African Americans, American Indians, we in America, we're an empire. We took everything we have from other people. And it seems we're intent on doing that again with Greenland, Canada, Gaza, and the Panama Canal. And who knows what would be next after that. And then we have the temerity of, saying that we represent the rule of law and that this is all wonderful. Actually, I shouldn't say that because we don't anymore. And Donald Trump doesn't even pretend to believe or want to associate with international institutions or the rule of law, treaties. None of that matters. The only thing that matters, law of the jungle. I'm bigger than you. I can take what I want. So at this point, it's really difficult to see how this is going to work out. The U.S. has adopted what I call the Tonya Harding defense. Tonya Harding was a international figure skater, and her best friend, Christine Yamaguchi, she was Japanese, not Chinese, make that distinction. She decided that she could beat her if it came to the Olympics. So she had her boyfriend and another guy go over and try to break her legs. And that's exactly what we have here. The U.S. is afraid that China will beat them. So what is our choice? We, instead of having this Sputnik moment where we say, hey, competition, we're ready for it, we're going to do this. We said instead, we don't want to compete. Look, we're entitled to this. And if they're doing this, they must be cheating. If they're cheating, we're entitled to try to isolate them, to make up false narratives about them, to harass them on their periphery, to do anything necessary to keep ourselves in front. People have to realize that the third largest military budget in the world after the US and China is the US again. It's the budget that we spend on spying and disinformation. It's huge. All right. And that we don't talk about, but we constantly accuse others of spying on us when we are in fact the major spy agency in the world. And then if you add in our four other eyes, I mean, we outrank and outclass everybody by even more than our regular military. So this has become the way in which we deal with things. If we're doing something, we accuse other people of doing it, and then we try to flip the script, as they say, to make other people on the defensive, ironically, about the things we do. But the hypocritical factor starts to wear on things. And I think a lot of people in the world are just tired of this kind of constant attack, accusation, while we, unfortunately, refuse to obey the rules that we tell other people to.
It is fascinating that how that is $1 billion budget to influence media's coverage of China, and all of this, of course, at a point in time when the U.S. I mean, it's a good time to engage in some very strong or forceful industrial policies. I thought that the deep seek moment would be the Sputnik moment for the U.S. to to go back to work, if you will. But but it didn't really happen. How are you did mention the weaponization of technology, the semiconductors, but of course we also see to some extent the weaponization of the banking system, currency. Well, this is more, of course, used against the Russians, while weaponization of technology supply is used against the Chinese. But to what extent do you see the Chinese hedging against the weaponization of the banking system and currency? Because the Chinese I spoke to, they kind of had this feeling that after the sovereign funds of Russia was seized, that they were next on the chopping block. Do you know to what extent this is an actual concern and what China has done to, well, against hedge against this?
Well, okay, so they've been drawing down the amount of treasury bills that they actually hold for quite a bit of for quite a long time. But the stuff that you see on the surface isn't everything. There are banks on the private side, Chinese institutions that hold U.S. depositories because it was always considered safe. China's official position is that it will hold enough funds so that it can facilitate trade, so that you're not constantly selling and buying dollars and things like this, that you can facilitate the trade. And obviously, there's a large um, uh, economic benefit to China in terms of the balance of trade and things like this. But this is a very, very dangerous area for the United States. The more that we weaponize SWIFT, the interbank settlement system, and just basically use it as a blunt instrument of our foreign policy, not just against Russia. We use it against Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, and it's quite probable that it'll be used against China. But there brings up a conundrum. The United States, if you take a look at the world 20 years, let's say 30 years ago, and you look at countries that had primary trade relations with the U.S., you've seen all of this blue, if the blue was the color. If you look at it today, and red is the color of China, the world is all red, just a few blue spots here and there. So China has been doing currency swaps. They're preparing for that. They have bought a lot of gold. But they've also done something which I think is very clever. A few months ago, they issued bonds in Saudi Arabia. The bonds were backed by U.S. treasuries, which they held. And in essence, it's non-recourse. The backup of this are these U.S. treasuries. So when you issue these new bonds with the old asset, these treasury bills, you in essence can take the money out without affecting the market. If China started selling 750 plus $1 billion worth of treasuries, it would cause a run on the system and would actually harm China because the price would go down dramatically, so they'd be getting less money back, and there would be global disruption. And that is not in China's interest. They want to have a steady, stable world where trade is global, people do things according to ability, and those countries that can encourage and help those countries who are having issues. It's very, very different perspective. And this is what this China's been, it's fine to say multipolar world as if it's a good thing. It can be a good thing if you have basic understandings and agreements that, countries need to be secure, that they need a path to development, that they need to be respected. But if it turns into the law of the jungle, multipolar just simply means chaos. It means warlordism between countries. So China is very, very aware of this, and when they're trying to promote this idea that, we can grow together or we can die alone. And that we will, there'll be severe impacts if we don't get along. So China's promoting this view. The US has said, look, there isn't enough for everybody. It's a zero-sum game. We're bigger than you are. We're going to take your lunch money, and you're going to thank us for it. And in the future, maybe things turn out. If we're fat and happy, maybe something, trickles down to you. I don't know if that worked. That was something that Ronald Reagan used to pitch. I don't actually believe it. I don't. It was not my hero, but it was interesting. He was the one. I don't know. Do you know he was the one who talked about this shining city on a hill? You remember that?
Right.
And what was yeah. Well, what was interesting is prior to that, you had somebody like Richard Nixon, and of course you had his Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Henry was responsible for killing South American duly elected presidents, for attempting to kill Castro, Bay of Pigs, everything there. And then you move to Southeast Asia and stuff they did in Africa. Millions of people died, right, in these countries. But it would never have occurred to him to apologize. His was all about realpolitik. Powerful countries are powerful so long as they use their power to maintain their power. E.g., if somebody looks at you funny, you kill all of their relatives just to show them that you don't look funny at me. It's just pure law of the jungle. I'm on top, you're on the bottom. Me, Tarzan, you cheetah, right? But then Reagan comes along, and coincidentally, remember, his cabinet still holds the record for the most number of indicted and convicted cabinet secretaries, and said, "Oh, the United States is this, shining city on a hill." Well, what's the imagery there? Some of that light's coming from somewhere. That was the metamorphosis of the U.S. going back to some sort of God guided entity that was doing good, and this idea of American exceptionalism. I'm sure you've seen that many, many times. This idea that, well, to make omelets, you have to break eggs. If we are going to make a better world, yes, we might have to kill a few million people and bomb things back to the Stone Ages, but it's all going to be worth it in the end. Well, so far, it hasn't been worth it. America is bankrupting itself with the cost of these wars. The rest of the world isn't thankful for what America is doing. And then you get a president who decides to declare economic war on 180 states, 180 nations, including some very, very confused penguins.
Yeah, the penguins. This was a good indicator that they didn't do their homework properly. No, I think the problem was, I think the Cold War created some additional problems for the West, because when everything was this black or white, I think the idea is that you have to dominate in order for the good values and the good governmental system to survive. And of course, I think the Western democracy and capitalism was better than Soviet communism. But the problem is when hegemony is supported by ideology in this manner, it does the ends tend to legitimize any means, and after a while, we see the same in Europe now. We say, the EU is the democratic institution, so all our neighboring states they have to look towards the EU rather than towards Moscow for leadership. Then towards this end, democracy can become a problem if people vote the wrong way, and suddenly the whole intention behind the hegemon is turned on its head again. John Hertz wrote about this back in the early 1950s that the countries that are liberal democratic within, they often demand international systems where they dominate because they can't let the good values be undermined by the majority. And so it is a common phenomenon.
Yes. We have to guard democracy from people who will vote.
Well, yeah, this is what you see now when the liberal ideas and democracy comes in conflict. But you mentioned SWIFT, that this was that the Chinese were worried that this could be weaponized against them as well. I mean, the Chinese came up with SIPs, is it in 14 or 15? But this has huge implications, doesn't it? Because once with SWIFT, when you have an overview over all bank transactions being made, it allows for a lot of extraterritorial sanctions that if the US has some domestic legislation, other countries have to follow it. But also the Americans had a lot of information if everyone was trading with everyone. If you look at the business where we need predictability in agriculture and all, this is very valuable information to have. But to what extent is the US is bearing costs of losing control over this key, I guess, administrative control over the international economy?
Well, I mean that's you make an excellent point. I mean we're tugging at two ends of the rope. All right, one is you maintain your dollar hegemony, and that allows you to finance your growing debt pile at very very low rates. But the other thing is once you weaponize it, all right, and countries become concerned, and that's not just China. Every single country out there is concerned because they have political risk. If they're a democracy, tomorrow they could have a left-wing government, and the U.S. will swoop in and take everything. Why? Because we can. That is not the basis of a sound monetary system. I can't force you to hold what I have. And that's why you're seeing gold right now at historic highs over 3,000. I just can't believe it. But, people are making a flight towards what they believe is safety. I mean, they're even putting their money into a Ponzi scheme called Bitcoin. I love that. Can you hold it in your hand? No. Can it be stolen? Oh, yes, yes. So it's not secure. Well, well, what's the purpose? Government doesn't know that I have. I don't know about things. I did a year as an intern in the prosecution office, and I was also a defense attorney for a few years. I can tell you, there's people who want too much anonymity. You have to kind of ask why. So, where is this going? And saying that the existing system is fractured. Be assured, China does not want to take over. They do not want the yuan to be the new dollar. And there's reasons behind that. They've seen what happens. They're an export country. When you start being the reserve currency of the world, the value of your currency starts to go up, which is great if you're trying to, manage a debt pile and, keep your interest rates low. But China isn't in that area. They want to keep trading. So they do not want the effects that happen when you become the reserve currency. So instead, they're looking for multipolar options. And it's going to take time. I mean, obviously, BRICS, Russia is very interested in pushing that along, but so increasingly are other countries. Now, this is the problem with Donald Trump. He says he wants to maintain American hegemony. And that's great, except what he's doing is undermining what little we have left. I mean, no one's really happy with us abroad. And now we're undermining our own currency That is not a good idea. It's not going to end well. I mean, the reason he panicked and put the 90-day hold on is he saw what was happening to bond yields, which are going up. This is not a good thing. The dollar was plunging; it's down by 9% against from the time that he entered office. It's the markets have cratered. We're in correction territory, around 20%. And you have this situation where what's going to happen next? People understand it doesn't matter. He keeps saying, "Well, if Powell would just drop the rates, the head of the Fed, everything would be fine." No, it wouldn't. And I can tell you, bonds was one of my specialties. Bonds are about risk. All right. If the United States, if the monetary value of the dollar is dropping, that means if I invest $100 and when whatever the interest rate is, if I only expect to get $80 back, I need to have enough interest so that it covers that that $20 I lost, plus what I think is appropriate profit. So you're going to start to see bond rates actually spike. And this is where he suddenly got a dose of reality. But the question is, how does he back down in a face-saving way that, where he can say, "Oh, I was planning to do this all along." Our friend Donald Trump, he always said, there's always a reason he was doing something. And no matter how badly it failed, it was all part of a plan, just like his 6 bankruptcies with his casinos in Atlantic City. So China has left some breadcrumbs. What they did is 2 weeks ago, they issued a 6-point white paper. I'm sure you saw it. And one of the points they went on about the phase one deal and how it didn't work out, and how it should have been done. Well, clearly, this was a signal to Washington. The face-saving way out of this is a phase two deal. And the question is, why would China push that? Well, very simply, because if things crater, it's not about, the U.S. is suffering. Isn't that great? U.S. suffers, the world suffers. We're heading towards a recession. The question is, do we end up in a depression? China does not want a depression. So you have to be an adult. You have to do what is necessary to do it. And they followed up on that. A couple of 3 days ago, they unilaterally took down the tariffs on certain types of circuitry. And this was a sign to Washington to say, okay, we'll take the first step. Now, you do something reciprocal, then we'll do something, then you do something. We'll get to a point where we can sit down rationally and you're not pointing a gun to our head, and we can figure out how to do this phase two deal. You declare victory. This is what you wanted all along, and China can say, well, we took one for the team. We've got the tariffs reduced, not only in China, but globally. And if that happens, China's stature rises. They have taken on the playground bully, and they have done something on behalf of everybody on the playground, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to do this for me because it's in my interests. Their only interests. They're nothing else. I mean, I don't know about you, Glenn, but I really don't like that. The idea that countries don't have friends; they only have interests. That is the law of the jungle, right? And that is a slippery slope. Once you head down that, you're basically prepared to do almost anything because you can justify it, like American exceptionalism, like Secretary of State Kissinger. And I don't think that that's the future. I hope it isn't.
Yeah, I wrote a book a decade ago about the emerging geo-economic partnership between China and Russia, and I got a lot of pushback because the argument was, no, well, within a year or two they're gonna clash over Central Asia or who gets to dominate. And well, goes back to what you said, that this assumption that they have to do it in zero-sum terms, that they have to have this battle for dominance. Because what you actually saw was the recognition that there were better positive sum solution, that is. The Chinese also recognized, well, if we take into account the other side's interest when we walk around in Central Asia, given that it's on their border, then they will be more likely to accommodate us. And you see this, yeah, none of these expectations went as expected. Instead, they avoided this struggle for dominance. And I think that often in Washington, this assumption that it's Cold War again. One will crash, the one will take away the prize and be the dominant. That this isn't really there's no anymore any play for hegemony. There's too many large powers, and it's not always in the interest to have this very strong zero-sum push. Indeed, what made it comfortable for the Russians to live side by side with a much more powerful China is the fact that the Chinese do not demand to dictate what happens, for example, in Central Asia. They accept to be one among, even the first among equals, but still one among equals. And yeah, I think this has been the secret. Also forming these institutions like SEO or BRICS, where you have many large powers so that they can communicate to the rest. Yes, we're the largest one, but we can't dictate because there's too many large actors within this bloc. And I think this signaling to the other countries that they don't intend to dominate, only to be a leading power. I think this is something that has a very soothing effect on, yeah, on its partner states. It's but we don't like to learn much from others. So no.
Well, you know
Um,
what they say about not learning about history.
Well, it took me to yeah, the last point on the economic war, because often this is the semiconductors, the banking system, all of this economic war is a large extent the US initiated, and but it turns to have a boomeranging effect. But we often forget that the Chinese have also an ability to retaliate, and in an area where the Chinese seem to dominate is definitely the rare earth minerals. Again, they do the mining, they do the processing. This can't simply be replaced within even the next decade. So to what extent do the Chinese dominate in these rare earth metals, and what is the actual relevance?
Okay, so it's a mistake. Rare earths are all around the world, and there is not a shortage. There are lots. The question is, what is the concentration? So that goes to the feasibility of mining them. If I high concentration area, that's better than a low concentration area. There are environmental side effects to it as well. But the major thing that China has, and people don't seem to understand this, is the processing. China processes upwards of 90% of the world's rare earths. And the reason they do that is because they can do it cheaper and better. They get higher purity, and they're able to do it at much less cost. So that's why people have gone there. It's like, why does India trade with China when so many Indians have a poor view of China? Well, they like the goods and the cost, right? It's a market system. So this is where China is, and I've talked to people in rare earths outside of China. I said, where is China? And they said it's 10 to 15 years ahead of us in terms of processing. All right, they have the existing mines, so they can do this stuff. So right now we're over a barrel. We can talk about developing mines and the logistics to get this thing done, but what do we do for the next 2 years? All right, does everything go on hold? China is now kind of cracking down on South Korea, which was acting as a conduit. Their rare earth consumption went up by 113% within a year. Let me figure that one out. So you can clearly see that they were trying to profit. As you know, with Russia, you have a lot of countries who are importing oil, and all of a sudden they're exporting a lot of oil as well. And India is primary among them. And the irony is that Europeans are buying oil from India, which is actually from Russia, and pretending somehow that this makes sense. It doesn't at all. But goes back to your point, ideology. Once you think you have all the answers and everyone else is just stupid unless they follow yours, you're bound to run into a problem. People have not been able to be pigeonholed over recorded history. We've had, groups like Genghis Khan who took it by force. The Romans who said, well, logically, everyone wants what we have. We give you running water, roads, things like this. And yet those empires fail. And the question isn't that America is going to fail tomorrow. It's that we have a lot of resources We do still have good people. They may be from other places, but to the extent that they'll stay in America, they can power a lot of our innovation. But we are weakening ourselves, and unfortunately, we're weakening the world. And with Russia and China, I mean, the issue here is that there are tensions. There have been in the past and things like that. But things have changed. The idea of trying to garner more land appeals to nobody. Why? Because it's too much trouble, right? Chinese farmers are actually working in Russia, and they're paying the Russian landlords good money, and they're producing things. Russia is the #1 resource country in the world. China is the #1 manufacturing company in the world. What Washington fears most, and Donald Trump said this on the campaign trail, is that China and Russia together are unbeatable and that they would eclipse the United States. So I remember having a conversation with Viktor Yakunin. He used to run the Russian railway system, and he was very close to Putin. And after a little while of a discussion between some Chinese people and him, things like that, he was being very forceful, saying, "Okay, this is what I want. This is what I want to get accomplished. Is this possible?" And the Chinese side were drawing this big circle, all right, where they think maybe there was consignment, but they wouldn't talk directly about it. And I tried to explain that this to both sides. I says, you have a cultural miscommunication here. You deal in different ways. You need to learn more about each other, not just language, but in terms of how you approach things, how you look at them. Once you know how somebody else looks at them, I mean, it's the first rule of business. I want to be successful. I have to understand my client, all right? I have to understand my suppliers. I have to understand everything about my business in order to eliminate risk. And this is the same thing for China and Russia. They need to learn more about each other, despite having, this long history and a shared border and everything like that. But Russia and China understand this. Russia is looking for security. They were guaranteed security when the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they were told not 1 inch into previous Soviet areas would they go. And that was Howard Baker. He was a heavyweight, right? He wasn't somebody who you just say, "Oh, well, who cares what he says," right? This guy is as close to the inside as they come. He made that. It was recorded. And, then all of a sudden you have these clever idiots saying, well, they didn't get it in writing, so therefore it doesn't count. Well, it wouldn't account anywhere, even if it was in writing, because there is no enforcement agency when it comes to nations. They have to abide by each other. They have to deal honestly with each other. That's where I get this interest thing. Makes me angry, because you have to have friendship and trust. It has to be built up over years. It can be easily taken away in a mere seconds. But it is necessary to prevent conflict, to have understanding, to create these things. So China's understanding that Russia needs its security, right? That when they went into Ukraine, that was the last straw. It wasn't a question of, anybody, no one in the West had any ambiguity about it. I mean, everybody, Mearsheimer, every statesman out there said, you go into Ukraine, Russia will fight you. They will fight back because you've violated every promise that you've ever made. All right. They have no reason to believe you won't put missiles, which are 5 minutes away from Moscow, on there. I mean, we wanted to start a nuclear war because they were going to put nuclear missiles in Cuba. It was a hell of a lot further away from Washington than the border of Ukraine. So you have these impossible situations, but China understands Russia wants security. They don't want more land. They don't need more resources. They have all the resources they need. They simply don't want to be encircled by a hostile entity, the United States, who is intent on making sure that they don't rise. And the same concern is shared by China. They see everything that the U.S. does with its false narratives about Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, all the interference that is there. And they know these are just being used to try to get China off track from its development process. So, yes, the US is an unreliable, rogue actor. And I don't say that lightly, but you have, when you look at the evidence, I don't know what else you could say. Does it start wars unilaterally? Yes. Does it break treaties that it entered? Yes, multiple times. Does it undermine international institutions like the WTO, the ICC? I mean, the list goes on. Does it withdraw from treaties that have global implication and importance, like Kyoto and the Paris Climate Accords? Yes. Does it unilaterally say it's going to take over the territories of other countries in violation of, sovereignty? Yes. So I don't know how you can not classify the US as a rogue nation. And unsurprisingly, countries are reacting to it as such. What they see is just unbridled me first stuff, America first. I don't care what happens to you. You should just be glad you're supporting me. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is something I would expect out of an 11-year-old bully on the playground. Fortunately, this 11-year-old bully, his name is Donald Trump, has the understanding of economics of the same 11-year-old.
It's no, it's again. I think a lot of this goes back to the positive some solutions you mentioned. The Chinese aren't going for any land in Russia, but again, this for a long time this was concern because after the Opium Wars, when China was broken, the Russians also seized plentiful of Chinese land, which covered also the Pacific coast. So this even created two landlocked regions in the northeast of China, so which have developed slower than the others. So the main concern was as China grew stronger, at some point they would want to challenge these unfair treaties. But we saw instead that they came to more economic agreements. Also, the Russians modernized their ports on the Pacific coast. They built railroads as well as bridges now into these regions in China to effectively make them more connected to world markets. So instead, trying to make some money of it, and of course, the wider goal of trying to make Russia now well. To make Russia and China best friends in terms of both economics and politics, and it has worked to a large extent. You mentioned, Vladimir Yakunin. He came up in the ranks with Putin. He was the CEO of Russian Railways. I know him. I did some work or presentations at a couple of times at his think tank, and he actually wrote the endorsement for my book on great power politics in the fourth industrial revolution. So yeah, he's a very smart guy, though. But
Small
he's
world.
but he's also
Small
looking
world.
very hard at connecting Russia closer and closer with China. So it's quite fascinating. Yeah, small world as well. Uh, but uh, I think often we miss these solutions because in Europe, like they keep everything is either pro this or pro that, and I often make the point I'm awfully pro-Ukrainian, which is why I always said that if you threaten NATO expansion, Russia will destroy it, which is why but it's very hard because they say, well, if you're pro NATO or Ukraine, then you have to be pro NATO expansion. But the whole argument is, you don't enhance your security by ignoring the security of your opponents. It makes no sense. Anyways, I just my last question though is about if the economic conflicts between China and the US would become militarized. What do you see this as possibly a war breaking out over Taiwan, or do you think the accusation of genocide in Xinjiang will lead anywhere, or is this already dying out?
Well, it's dying out because, which people don't understand is that Xinjiang is the number 2 tourist destination in China. So people are
So
there all the
it's not
time.
a new Auschwitz then.
Yeah, well, I've talked to people like that. I mean, there's this fable that's created by false narratives. We've already seen what the USAID and also the what you call it for democracy.
NED,
Hmm?
our National
Yeah,
Endowment for Democracy. Yeah.
yes, not NED. They were directly funded by the government. Their thing was regime overthrow, and they do anything necessary to do that. Their footprints are everywhere that you've seen any kind of uprising, including mostly democratic states, where they come in and and it's not even subtle. I mean, you're talking about poor nations. Where do poor people on the street get the money for glossy signs that, are professionally done and printed out and all the same? I mean, they don't have enough money. They're angry because they don't have jobs and money, but yet they have these freshly printed T-shirts and posters and all of these types of things. They have money for organization and radios and how to bring things together. And then you have the false narratives that are being pushed out through the press. And I know many people in the press. Over the years, I've been a member of the what do you call it? The Journalist Association here. It's worldwide, and if most people come knowing what China is. They've never been to China, but they know it's a terrible place. It's people are not safe here. You could be snatched off the street at any time. Xinjiang is a labor camp. Hong Kong is someplace depressed. Tibetans only lived, for the return of the Dalai Lama. I mean, Glenn, let's be serious here. Well, the Dalai Lama was there. Yes, people are entitled to their spiritual beliefs. I believe that, and I would defend that. But the idea that the church and the nobles there allowed people to live to the ripe old age of 42 in bone-crushing poverty because they could not own land because land was either owned by the nobles or it was owned by the church. It was serfdom, and it was bone-crushing. And the church diverted people's attention to saying, "Don't worry about this life and how horrible it is. You will be reborn, and it will be better." Well, I don't know if it's true or not, but it sounded awfully much like the triumvirate of the army, church, and nobility in the Dark Ages when they were preaching the same thing to keep the serfs down, to deny them even basic necessities. They had short, brutish lives. I don't think anybody, and I've talked to people to Tibet quite a bit. It says, "Do you long for those days?" Oh, of course not. No, but they still have spiritual beliefs. They still need to be respected. But these are the kinds of things that they don't talk about. There's in the West they have this romanticized things of lost horizons. They think that there's in the middle of the Tibetan plateau there's a valley where it's lush green and people live to 100 years old. That never happened. It wasn't like that. That was a book of fiction. Unfortunately, fact and fiction have merged in people's minds, and they're going in terms of solutions. Unfortunately, I have to say that there is no positive solution until you have leaders in the US who finally realize that they're not there to run the world. They're there to run their country. And in order to do that, they need to have trust. All right. They need to have the ability to work with other nations. They can't go it alone. And until that comes about, I think it's almost impossible. You can't deal with a rogue nation. You can try to put them off. You can try to delay, as China is trying to do, to wait for the next thing, take the long view. But if this continues, yeah, there could be a war. It wouldn't be a war where anybody wanted it, just like World War I. It would be a war where it starts chain reactions due to mistakes and people just simply saying, escalating the situation. And that's my greatest concern. And especially now. And this is one of the reasons I believe that Beijing is so concerned about what's happening in Washington. The last card that Washington has is the military card. And if for some reason they try to push that as a means of getting its other ends in terms of economics, then you could have mistakes made in escalation and lead to something that would be very, very serious, not only here, but the rest of the world. But even as we speak, the situation between India and Pakistan is spiraling out of control. Instead of having time, the world should be paying very close attention to that. There should be an independent investigation. Russia should be there. China should be there. The US should be there. India, Pakistan, probably Turkey, and maybe somebody else from the BRICS, Brazil, seen as actors who do not have a political purpose. and establish what the facts were behind this heinous terrorist attack. But it has to be diffused. The idea that these countries would go to war. As I was on a program and I said, listen, please, you think about what this means to your countries, but realize if you two go to nuclear war, the fallout from that would wash over the rest of Asia, right? And eventually towards the United States and around the world back to you. The consequences would be devastating far beyond anything that could happen to you. So please, I know this is a horrible thing and you're confronting it, but you have to think globally a little bit. You can't just think, well, I need to make a point. I need to show that I'm strong. I need to, kill a bunch of people because that will solve a lot. Being facetious.
Yeah. No, I think people forget though in the yeah, with nuclear weapons, it's the war itself becomes the main enemies instead of yeah, thinking about how you can score some zero-sum points. Anyways, Einar Tangen, yeah, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, and I feel a bit wiser now. So yeah, thanks again.
Well, it's always a pleasure and an honor to be on your show, Glenn. I really appreciate your work and all the best.
Thanks again.